Welcome to B'nai Abraham Chabad. Welcome to the Bright Side program. We're going to begin with a prayer, Psalm 122. Shir Amalos LaDavid Samachti B'Omrim Li Beis Adonai Nelech. Oim Dois Hoy Ragleinu B'Sharayich Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim Habenuya Kir Shachubra Lo Yachtav Shasham Olu Shvatim Shivta Ya'edus Li Yisrael V'Hoydes Hashem Adonai. Ki shama yashvu chisais lemishpat chisais leis David shalu shalom Yerushalayim yishloyu ayavoyich yishalom v'chelech shalom v'amar noisayich leman achai v'reya davar nashalom bach leman beis Adonai Eloheinu avashet hivlach. A song of ascents by David. I was happy when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet were standing within your gates, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem that is built like a city in which all Israel is united together. For there the tribes went up, the tribes of God, as enjoined upon Israel, to offer praise to the name of the Lord. For there stood the seats of justice, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you have peace. May there be peace within your walls, serenity within your mansions. For the sake of my brethren and friends, I ask that there be peace within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I seek your well-being. We're studying the Pirkei Avot during these summer months. It's a tradition to study the ethics of the fathers. And there's one mission in particular which I'd like to study together with you. It's from chapter 2 in the Ethics, Mishnah 9. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 outstanding disciples. And he challenged them. He said to them, what is a good way to which a person should cleave? In other words, if you're looking to develop a particular character trait, what is the best way to cultivate that character trait? What should you be striving for? So here are the 5 responses of his 5 disciples. Rabbi Eliezer said, Ayin Toiva, a good eye. Rabbi Joshua said, a good friend. Rabbi Yosei said, a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said, one who considers the consequences of his actions. And Rabbi Elazar said, a good heart. Said Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his disciples, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arach to all of yours. For in his words, yours are included. The first answer, Rabbi Eliezer said, was Ayin Toiva, a good eye. And he said, in that, if you develop a good eye, if you're able to cultivate a good lens through which to see experiences and other people, how you judge others through the lens of a good eye, included in that are all the other positive character traits. So we've been talking about the importance of positive thinking, the importance of cultivating this good eye. And they tell the story of an older man who came to the rabbi and complained. He said, Rabbi, I have to work so hard. My work is difficult labor. I'm a water carrier, and I have to schlep all these water barrels. And on top of that, my son-in-law died. I have to now take care of the needs of my daughter and her family. Life is tough. The next day, this same man comes back to the rabbi and he's smiling. He's happy. The rabbi turns to him and says, what are you so happy about? He says, Rabbi, life is good. Thank God I'm able to support myself with my own labor. I don't have to go and beg. And not only that, I'm able to even help support my daughter and her family. Thank God. So it's all a matter of perspective. How we choose to view others, how we choose to view events and experiences around us can make all the difference. I want to share with you a story that I heard from my grandfather, a story that he heard from a fellow passenger on a flight to Israel. So my grandfather, Rabbi Shimon Goldman, was once traveling to Israel and decided to stretch his legs and take a walk down the aisle of the airplane. And he meets a Jew who starts up a conversation with him. And this Jew says to him, "You look very familiar. Have we met?" And they're trying to figure out if they've ever met before. "Are you from Brooklyn?" "No, I'm from Queens." "Do you know this one? Do you know that one?" And finally, they realized that indeed they had met before. My grandfather was active on the board of a girls' school called Beth Rivka in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And there was a particular meeting that he had attended together with this Jew. And this person was an activist. He described himself as a vice president of a well-known college. But in his spare time, he would do everything that he could to help the cause of Jewish education. So this fellow passenger tells my grandfather that, I would often help institutions, I would often help Jewish schools by navigating the bureaucracy of government funding for them. And I would assist these institutions by preparing all of the paperwork necessary to apply for these grants, state and federal grants. It was very tedious work, but very rewarding. And I felt happy that I had the opportunity to help all of these Jewish schools and Jewish students who were benefiting from the government funding thanks to my efforts. In recent months, this man said, I noticed that we were not as successful as we had been in the past. My long hours of filling out paperwork went unrewarded. For some reason, we were getting denial after denial. And I decided to investigate. Something seemed very strange. And after some meticulous research, I discovered that the applications I was submitting did not even reach the federal level. They were aborted at the state level by a clerk who happened to be Jewish, who deliberately looked for petty flaws in each and every application. And this caused me tremendous distress. I was so disappointed, knowing that all my work was for nothing. Not only had all my hours that I've been putting in to this effort been a waste of time, but more importantly, the schools themselves were not benefiting from the funding that they so desperately needed. I decided I have to go and speak to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe would greet people on Sundays. He would distribute dollars for tzedakah, making people his agent or emissary to give that dollar to tzedakah. But it will also be an opportunity for a blessing. And one particular Sunday morning, this man gets online, and again, he's very, very agitated by the turn of events, and in particular, this individual who was disrupting the process of allowing these state and federal funds to flow to the Jewish institutions. And so he says, without even thinking too much, I blurted out, I said to the Rebbe, that in the past, when a person stood in the way of benefiting the Jewish people, our leaders would make sure that they would not be able to interfere. And I want a blessing. I'm asking the Rebbe to do something to stop this Jewish clerk from doing what he's doing. The Rebbe listened patiently to my complaint, he says. And then he shared the following message. If one considers another person to be 90% lacking in goodness and merit, one must nevertheless remember that he still possesses 10% of positive virtue. This is a classic example of a good eye, where even something as disappointing as somebody like this story, the Rebbe was able to not judge them, but in fact help other people to see that this person must have some redeeming qualities. And even if it's only 10%, perhaps we can focus on that 10% and help them develop the other 90% that they need to develop that good eye. Our guest today is Dr. Davida Krupnick, who completed her residency in dermatology at Jefferson University in Philadelphia, her internal medicine residency at Columbia University in New York. She is a member of the American Academy of Dermatology and also serves as a volunteer faculty at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital here, contributing to resident education in addition to her private practice. Hello and welcome, Davida. Welcome to the Bright Side.
Thank you for having me.
So we've been talking on the Bright Side program a little bit about how we've each confronted the reality that's around us. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you if you could share a little bit about what you do and your work as a doctor.
So my name is Davida Krupnick. I am a dermatologist. I work in the community at a private practice. I see obviously a number of varied conditions, anything from skin cancer, acne, kids to any age. And I've been doing that now on my own for a few years, and then of course in training for years before.
Okay, great. And as a dermatologist, have you been able to work throughout the past few months? Was there a period of time where your office was completely shut down? Did you switch to telemedicine? How does that work?
In March, when the pandemic initially, became dramatically worse, our office did predominantly shut down. We did mostly telehealth. However, we always had one provider in the office in general at a time for emergencies. It's not like there are a million dermatologic emergencies, but there are certainly some, and we felt like it was a priority to have a place where people could come in for their dermatologic care that wasn't an urgent room, that wasn't going to put them at risk. So there was always a provider there. I was not there. I did telehealth for those 2 months. And then in mid-May, I went back to seeing patients in the office. While there's a lot that we could do via telehealth, and of course, most things, luckily, in dermatology aren't urgent, ultimately, there's a lot that you can't do, including skin checks, which are obviously a huge part of dermatologic care and skin cancer management. And we felt that at a certain point, the benefit of seeing our patients for these conditions outweighed the personal risk and the risk to our patients in the office.
Okay, so for the most part, you really do need to see patients in person in order to treat them.
Certainly for many conditions, that's definitely true.
Right.
So starting in mid-May, we were back there in the office.
How have things changed since you reopened?
Well, I think there was a huge difference between the end of May, early June, when the city was still essentially on lockdown. And now, when I think most things have opened up to some degree or another, not everything, of course, but a lot of things, and people are out and about, I think that changes both in the fact that people are more, are more out and about, but also just in the level of fear that providers had and that patients had regarding their care. I think in May, there was still a lot of fear surrounding COVID, and I think there still is to a degree, but it's been dampened by the fact that we know more. We know how that masks are a huge asset in terms of our own protection and those of people around us. And I think there's also a degree of, you just have to live your life. And especially as a physician, I think you have to realize that you can try to minimize the risk as much as possible, but ultimately you're an essential worker, even when you're not treating COVID patients. And it's important to be there for your patients, and you just have to minimize the risk and get over any fear. And I think in May, there was still a lot of that, both for others and myself. And I think as the time has gone on, there's been less and less.
Sounds familiar. Yeah. Do you do any cosmetic work for patients?
So I actually am in the middle of transitioning to a new job. This is my week between jobs, but I won't be doing any going forward. And I didn't feel when the shelter in place was in practice, I didn't do any cosmetics. I didn't think that it was worth the risk to the patient or the risks to myself. After that, I only really did cosmetics that could be done with a mask still in place, and that I thought would be safe for the patient and myself. For instance, fillers is a part of dermatologic practice. I wasn't going to do lip fillers, which involve being very close to someone's mouth and for them to be very close to my face for long periods of time. And I think it's important to limit risk for everybody at this time.
Makes sense. I've heard that plastic surgeons have been very busy lately with elective surgeries because people are seeing themselves on Zoom a lot, and they're not liking exactly what they see, and they feel like their recovery can be covered and concealed by the mask. So there's an interesting twist over there.
There was a lot of demand. Actually, I think I was talking to the Allergan rep who was the person who sells a lot of filler and Botox, and she was saying that sales in, I think, like July or August were the highest they've been in years. So you're definitely on point there.
Interesting, yeah, interesting phenomenon. So let's talk a little bit about your experience with medicine in general. One of the themes that we've been talking to other doctors about has been the importance of one's positive and optimistic attitude towards healing. Very often, a patient is going through serious things. I'm not talking about cosmetic stuff, but I'm saying some of the skin cancers, for example, that you've been treating, where we see that a patient who has a positive approach, a positive attitude, and an optimistic mindset, that can actually help their physical healing. And I'm wondering, with your interaction with patients, if you've seen that in real life.
So, I mean, that certainly is something we see in dermatology, in the sense that a lot of inflammatory conditions, but even other conditions, and by inflammatory conditions, I mean eczema, psoriasis, we see them flare when you're very anxious, when people have certain high stress situations. And not, I don't know, negativity per se, but I think they're often, that sort of anxiety and sadness is often associated with negativity. We have seen now, I would say what's interesting is in the last few months, the dermatologic conditions that I saw, unfortunately, reflected a lot of anxiety. We've seen a lot of shingles, which is something that comes during times of stress. We've seen a lot of hair loss, which is something that happens in times of stress. And I think a lot of dermatologic conditions such as those two, they are definitely impacted by mood and staying calm and staying positive and things like that. Skin cancer is probably less so, but certainly a lot of eczema, psoriasis, hair loss, and even things like shingles can be impacted by that.
Do you try to do you ever talk to your patients about that? About how to manage their stress levels?
I can't say that I give them, copious amounts of advice in terms of things for their stress, but I do talk to them about stress management. I sometimes suggest things like meditation, yoga. In terms of medications, there are some minimally proven things that are supposed to minimize inflammation in the body, like turmeric and ginger and that kind of stuff. I don't talk about I don't talk about more specifics, I guess, but I certainly do suggest trying to do something that they think will make them more calm.
Makes sense. Okay. So one of the, this pandemic has obviously impacted all of us in many, many ways. But it's also given us a little bit of a different perspective and time to reflect on some of the changes that we've seen around us. And I'm wondering if you would be able to share with us whether there was any bright side or silver lining that you have found throughout this experience.
I think something that I found is that isolation has, ironically, in some ways, I think, made people appreciate one another more. I feel like people are really lonely, and that's something that I see a lot more. There was always people who lived alone, and it was never a huge deal. And suddenly, if you're living alone, especially again in like March, April, May, it was a huge deal. And you're really isolated. And some patients, when I saw them starting in May, June, I'd be the first person they saw in a month outside of, a grocery store, but the first person they've intimately interacted with. And I tried to be obviously more patient and more talkative, but it made me realize that these people were just so appreciative. Understandably, everybody, I think, is so appreciative of interactions with one another. And I think everyone values each other more, perhaps, than they did before. And hopefully that's something that lasts, that we really appreciate our family and our friends, and even just small interactions in the grocery store when we can smile at someone and, shake someone's hand, things like that. I think that's perhaps a silver lining that'll come out of this. I don't know, but that's what
it's actually, you articulated that so beautifully. It's something that I've seen myself firsthand on a community level. When we were able to reopen our shul, there were many, many people who expressed that to me, that, especially people who are living alone, who are single, who didn't have, people to quarantine with, as they say. But the sense of community, the appreciation for having a community of support, an extended family, a spiritual home, was something which was really valued by so many. And it really helped me appreciate the value of community even more so from hearing the perspective of those who were not able to have that for so long, and then came back and really showed us how important, how vital this is, how essential this is. Yeah, so it's something that we can hopefully take with us as we transition to the new normal. As we get back to somewhat normal life, we'll be able to appreciate the relationships that we have, friends, family, community, and how we cherish those relationships.
I hope so, and I think people will.
So that is our challenge, and I want to again thank you for all that you're doing as a healthcare hero in the community. Thank you for being there for people to bring healing to others, and thank you for sharing your experience with us. God willing, all the work from now on will be preventive measures, and you'll be able to focus on that element of healing, to to help others and to prevent them from getting sick in the first place.
God willing, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, all the best, and God willing, we'll be in touch. Thank you for joining us today on the Bright Side program. If you enjoyed this program, we ask that you consider even a small contribution to B'nai Abraham Chabad to help these programs continue. I want to thank our sponsors for making this possible and wish you a wonderful week.